So, hello, Rebel Scum. This is John. Sorry I had to take a little bit of a break there, dealt with some food poisoning and everything, but doing better, so I decided to go ahead and let's move on to the next portion of the Codex video that I've been working with. In previous I've talked about different writers and authors who have critiqued the Bible and what is written. And there are various people out there who have critiqued it, and there are various denominations, especially, who have their own individual take on it. There are a lot of evangelicals who will say, "Oh, the ASVB is the best translation." There are some that say the NIV is the best translation. There are some that say the King James is the best translation, and then there are those who just knock every translation out there. And I have my own opinion on that, and I'm going to try to steer clear of that. I'd like to be honest and present the historical facts first and foremost. And eventually I will move into the various translations and at least where they came from so that you know, because some of the bias against certain translations is born out of misinformation. The bias against the King James Version is ridiculous. There is this idea that it is this terrible book, that it is filled with errors. And I will actually list at some point people who have done the hardcore critiques. These are theologians, and some of them aren't even Christian theologians, but they have done some pretty amazing critiques of the King James, and you're likely going to be shocked by this, how right on it is. Liberty University has its own scale, and it places, the King James Version in a very specific point. But anyway, getting away from all that, sorry. So I want to stick to the historical narrative and not the denominational ones. And I'm going to be sticking with, rather than American theology, there are a lot of people here in America who have not studied, gone abroad, or even looked at physical copies of the original codexes, who believe that they are the authoritative people on Scripture. And I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to get into that because, sadly, here in America, theology is a very hotly contested topic. You're going to find people who really don't know what they're talking about a lot of times. And instead, I'm going to be going with various independent studies by various national groups. These are, sometimes they've been done by governments throughout history, or sometimes they're by just national colleges. But the studies that I'm going to stick to are the ones from England, France, Russia, Israel, and Germany. And so these are really these are all going to be historical outlooks on various documents. And, again, these are the codexes. These are the actual gatherings of books. This is when the books would have been brought together. All of the various letters out there would have been brought together to make a codex, which was the basis of what we call a Bible. Okay? And I'm going to start off by discussing the four most, in my opinion, influential. What do I mean by influential? I mean that they were used over the longest period of time and used by the greatest amount of people. There are other codexes out there. There are tons of codexes out there, and many of them were just personal codexes. A single individual would use them, or a group of people would use them, but they were never really translated further. Copies were never made further. There's tons of those out there. This was prior to the internet, prior to a great deal of travel. We were not really, people stayed in an area, and so they would basically translate what they had available, and they would use that. But anyway. So I'm going to be dealing with what I think are the most influential codexes as far as how long they were used and how many people used them. So starting off, there is the Codex Alexandrinus, and it originated around 400 AD. That's when it was collected all together. it is Byzantine in origin. So it actually is believed to have come from Alexandria. So it is a Greek Bible. It was translated entirely into Greek, so that portions of it that were once Hebrew became Greek, and portions of it that were once Latin became Greek. It is an entirely Greek Bible. Now, where can you go and see this codex? You can go and see it in the British Library. Okay? And that's the British Library in London. You can actually even purchase copies of it to take home and review yourself and do your own studies. But as far as where did it go, throughout history, well, we know that it started off somewhere in Alexandrian areas. Alexandria is the believed origin point of it, and it moved to Constantinople and was there for a great many years. It was used by the Orthodox for a long period of history, and from there it was brought to England in the 17th century. So this book has been around for an amazing amount of time when you really think about that, and it is still in existence, and people can go and see it today in a library. Isn't that amazing to even think? The next one, as far as most influential codex, I'm going to say is the Codex Ephraimi. It's from about 400 AD, and it's believed to have either come from Egypt, or it is believed to have been, its origin is again in the Eastern Orthodox. So, we can discuss that maybe. I mean, I think most people know where the church long ago. Boy, this brings up an important point, doesn't it? Just about every city in the world had a pope, or what they would call a papa, or a father, who basically oversaw the religious things of an entire city. And so, part of our history in the separation of the Catholic and the Orthodox was a disagreement between popes. And of course, the belief that the Pope in Rome was, following in the steps of Peter to be, basically the rock on which the church was built. And so we're talking about a disagreement, a huge disagreement that caused a splitting of the church. And it's not so much a splitting to begin with when you really think about it, because it's not like churches, in order to communicate, in order to do a lot of things, to travel, every city was almost a nation unto itself and a Christian entity. But we're also talking really ancient Christian history there, prior to Constantine. So you really have to think about your topics. But anyways, a lot of these codexes were set up by popes or the papas or fathers of the individual cities. And so please understand that when I say pope, or if I say papa, a lot of times with any of these, I am not referring to the Roman Catholic pope as per se, but more than likely the religious head of that city. And the term pope is used in that context even to this day, even though they weren't technically a pope over an entire city. But anyway, the Codex Ephraimi is, again, a Greek Bible, all translated into Greek, and it is in the National Library of France. And we're not certain where its origin is. Again, we think it's either Egypt or somewhere within the Eastern Orthodox areas of Constantinople. And it was brought to Paris after the fall of Constantinople. Prior existence, with a lot of it, is a mystery. People argue about what its origin is all the time, but we do know roughly where it's from. The next major one that I want to be sure to discuss is the Latin Vulgate. The Latin Vulgate was Jerome, and I mentioned him in a previous video. He is a huge figure in the history of the church. And this is his version predates the other two by about 20 or 30 years. It's about 380 AD, somewhere in that area. And it was commissioned by Pope Damascus to revise the old Latin texts of the church. So it was bringing the entire Bible together into Latin. The Old Testament was translated into Latin, and the New Testament was made sure to maintain the very specific Latin text within it. Now, Jerome is an interesting character, the Latin Vulgate, because Jerome hated his translation. And this, a lot of people are surprised by this, because this is the translation that would go on to influence Catholicism within Europe. Jerome hated his translation. You might think I'm being, a joke about that. No, you can go and research it. There are notes by Jerome on his translation as he worked on it, and he felt that he did a very poor job. He felt that his version of the Bible that he created, he went back and later on, and he would actually write notes and say, like, I left out this comma here, or I didn't use the right tense on this word here, minor problems. But at the same time, he was just so disgusted with his translation. But he was doing his job for the Pope at that point. But his was the first translation of the Old Testament into Latin, which makes it, very influential in of itself, because that's where it moved from into modern languages. It is the most influential Bible in the history of the world, which is kind of sad, I guess you could say. I mean, people debate and argue Jerome's translation all the time. It has been updated several times, but it doesn't really matter. But it is the most influential Bible in the world, including language that if you're a Christian, you have probably used these words. These words did not come into existence until Jerome basically created them from the Latin root words. And that is the word apostle, the word creation, the word salvation, justification, and even the word rapture. If you have ever used those words were literally created by Jerome and are based in a Latin root that did not exist until him. So you can see that even if you don't use his Bible, linguistic-wise, if you have ever said those words, you are personally affected by his translation, which is an amazing thought. We're talking about a translation that is 1,700 years old and has had that profound an effect on history, that words created in it are still used to this day and used outside the Catholic Church. So amazing thought when you think about that. And the last of the most influential is the Codex Bezae. This is the Syriac Bible, the Syriac Orthodox Church, the Syrian Christians. Now, I mentioned that, pretty much existed for a couple hundred years, and they did. But there are Syrian churches to this day that are based out of that same idea. And they claim that heritage. They have been a separate church from any church movement since pretty much the foundation of Christianity. They never joined with anybody else. Now the thing is, the Bible that they use, being that they are the Syrian Orthodox Church, the Bible that they use is based on the Codex Bezae. And the Codex Bezae is from Western Europe. It actually came either out of France or Italy, somewhere in those areas during that time period of about 400 AD. And it traveled to Syria, where it was used. Now, it contains both Greek and Latin elements. And so it more than likely was influenced a little bit by Jerome's Bible for it to basically have the Old Testament in Latin. And you can see this Bible as well. You can see this codex as well. It is currently being held at the Cambridge University, which is amazing. I just think that that is, so here are 4 codexes, the ones that have had the most influence on the world, used by the most people in the history of the world. And they are all still in existence, and they are all still available for people to go and see and to purchase your own copy. I do believe some of them have been even digitized to where you can get a digital copy and put it on your computer and look at these pages and look at the words that are used. It's amazing to really think that. But anyway, so there are the foremost, I think, influential codex. So I hope you enjoyed that information.